Alright, don't get me wrong, I genuinely had fun playing Space Crew, and I'm not just saying that because I'm getting paid by Curve Digital who made this game. But while this strategic space battle simulation was definitely enjoyable when played as intended, my personal best moments were not the times when I vaporized the champions or atomized the motherships. Oh no. In fact, I had the most blast doing quite the opposite, killing my own space crews. Now, before I confess how I developed this seemingly maniacal taste, let me tell you more about this game because quite frankly, I am obligated to do so by contract. So this is Space Crew, a game where you command the crews of your spaceships so they can carry out perilous missions while fighting hostile extraterrestrial beings. Well, more like spoon feed than command because these walking beings are competent yet mindless puppets. For example, this gunner will just sit and get bombarded only because I didn't tag what's floating right in front of his nose. Then the moment I point out the very existence of the enemy ship that's killing him, he dispatches the ship lickety-split. It's like watching a very efficient vacuum cleaner after I plugged it in. Anyway, coming 21st of October, this game will be welcoming its brand new campaign DLC, Space Crew Legendary Edition, which apparently includes entirely new enemies with more tricks up their sleeves, various weapons and gears to defend yourself from those very tricks, and a game mode that quite frankly feels like an entirely different game. I'm sure that would have excited me greatly if I had actually known this game beforehand, but having never played this before, I had to start with the original game, just Space Crew. Well, like I said, the game got me hooked pretty quick. But later, it became more apparent that what really pushed me to dive deeper into this game was my obsession to find more twisted ways to lose my crews. And while you may call me a sadist for that, you should also know that there are many spicy, spacey death scenarios the developers added in this game, and I am quite simply appreciating their fine dark works. It all started when I found that one of the fastest way to get rid of those pesky aliens who boarded my spaceship was by having my security officer open every single hatch and have them all sucked out into the cold infinite abyss as the entire ship got decompressed. This way, I got myself some classic Ridley Scott and immediately I wanted some Stanley Kubrick and decided to go HAL 9000 on their astronaut ass. So for some considerable amount of time, I did nothing but launch my crews into space in different fashions. I had one of them dragged away from the very front of the ship. I then had all of them dragged away from very front of the ship. I put a spacesuit on one of them, launched them, fetched them, and launched them again. I made this one leave via escape pod, retrieved the pod, then jettisoned both of them. I staged a mass murder, I staged an execution, I staged a mutiny, and I staged a noble sacrifice. I was learning more about the game too, because it was during these experiments I found that pressing shift and arrow keys allowed me to see through cameras placed within the ship. This of course was used to put myself in the front seat to view these very much intended casualties. In short, I was having a time of my life, all this fun from just one deadly mechanic. So naturally, I couldn't help but wonder, what other glorious demise could I subject my officers to? Well, from standard simple death by injury to classic yet cathartic self-destruction, I managed to find several. Some of them I only found by progressing further into the game, and that's how, like I mentioned before, this search for more ways to die became a strong motivator for me to continue and level up. Among them was one death scenario that particularly stood out due to its sheer longevity, drama, and suspense all at once, which occurred when I was trying to kill them all using fire. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present how Mike, Les, Thomas, Morgan, Sabo, Wingrove, and Polish Chuck died from space fire. In Space Crew, fire was started through two methods. 1. Have the enemies board a ship and shoot at certain ships' weak spot to start a fire. 2. Have the enemy ships shoot out those weak spots once the shields are down. As no boarding party showed up during this mission, I had to resort to the latter, but holy crap, the enemy firepower and fire rate was so pathetic that they could not keep up with even my most basic shield while they're down, allowing those shields to constantly be recharged before landing more devastating hits. So I had to order my engineer Morgan to manually take some power away from the shield. However, even with the shield's charger gone, it took embarrassingly long time for the enemy forces to crack open one of the circuit boards. I mean, it took so long that Polish Chuck nearly died from those gunfires, forcing me to shove him in a medbay so he could come back to die in a real fire. Since this was the first time I was trying to snuff not the flames but just the crews, I wanted to test a few things and literally play with fire. I sent Engineer Morganier for short, to the site with a fire extinguisher in his hand, and I used this opportunity to test how spontaneously the crews reacted to fire situation happening in their line of sight. Turns out, very passively. Apparently, you have to actually tell them to extinguish the fire that is roaring right in front of them, because they won't use that fire extinguisher until the fire's so close that they start smelling their own toes turning medium rare. I guess relatively, they do show more initiative than dealing those untagged enemies that's firing 2 feet away, but it still didn't change the fact that in a normal gameplay, I had to spoon feed those extinguished order to these walking beans. When the fire finally started kissing his facial hair, Morganier finally decided to not wait for my command, and before I could stop him, he even fixed the panel that was starting the fire, which made this whole process even longer. Like I said, this was indeed the first time playing with fire, so I wondered if these beans reacted more specifically when receiving damage from it. Thing is, I would have found it very disappointing if the astronauts simply stood like zombies and took the proximity damage as their health slowly chipped away over time. Like how they did with radiation, which honestly was the most boring cause of death. But then, Morgan was set ablaze! He started screaming, running back and forth in total agony. Oh, how I was delighted to see that the developers put a lot of thoughts and efforts into this grim scenario. After being cooked nicely on all sides, Morganier fell. But I granted him no peace, as I planned for him to be a part of much greater suffering. I started to gather all the crews in the engine room, because if a fire was to start from more than one place, probability-wise, that room would be the area being heated from all sides. And as we all know, ovens are the best appliances when cooking meat. I did not forget to take care of each member's well-being for now, as I did not want them dying too soon or too late. This had to be more ritualistic, where all members fell tandem like the world's most gruesome dominoes. While the spread was certain, its progress was painfully slow, and I was surprised how no other places ignited despite all the bombardments the ship received. My impatience could not take it anymore, so I put the captain back on the seat and traveled back to the home station where we'd be free from the enemies and which would then allow me to accelerate time. Unfortunately, it was only after the travel I realized that time acceleration was not available due to some safety mechanic implemented in the game. In the normal circumstances, I would have appreciated the feature, but right now it just meant that the whole Burning Man festival was going to take hellishly long for me. So I went back to the enemy territory because that was still the most surefire way to get more than just one fire started and speed up the whole process. But unfortunately, they still did a piss poor job, and it was only much later when they finally cracked open another panel right next to the engine room. Oh, forgot to mention, gravity's turned off. Made it that way so they would have trouble running away from the flames, but that had its own difficulties since the crews would often float around by themselves and I had to constantly drag them back into their execution chamber. At last, the fire had spread all the way to the engine room and started knocking at the door. It was none other than our Captain Michaelets who tasted its fury first, followed by Morganier, who we know had already suffered enough. Thomas somehow managed to be touched by the flames through a solid wall, causing him to be the first to be incapacitated. Morganier was the next to crumble, then the captain. Sabo showed a firecracker-like performance before she gave out, and that inspired to try something different with Wingrove, who had more health to spare than everyone else. I wanted to see how capable they could follow my orders even in the most dire circumstance, and so I commanded him to move towards the heart of the flame. To my utmost amazement, even when set on fire, even when suffering from one of the most excruciating pain known to mankind, Wingrove managed to follow every direction thrown at him, flailing his arms yet flawlessly moving from one destination to another in a zero-gravity situation. Wingrove was a man of focus, commitment, and sheer will. These people were no mindless puppets, but manifestations of determination, willing to follow orders even if they led to certain death. And after showing me the very definition of loyalty and discipline, Wingrove succumbed to his wounds, and so did the ship's reactor. The last surviving member, Polish Chuck, then died while trying to prevent the meltdown, taken by both fire and radiation. Space Crew is currently on sale on Steam, and since the new DLC Space Crew Legendary Edition will be given free to those who already have the original game, now will be a good time to add this to your Steam library. You will find a link in the video description and in my comment section. Although my dear sponsor didn't ask me to do that, I'm sure it's only because they forgot that no one reads the video description. So this one is on me, Curve Digital, and while I'm at it, I would like to also thank my supporters like Hyper and Nugget. Please consider pressing the like, share, subscribe, and cherry bell on top. With that being said, cheers!